conquered the Middle East in 332 BC. And Judah was a small province of the Persian Empire, and he swept away the Persian Empire before the Hellenistic forces and took over Judah, and it became a province of the Hellenistic Empire of Alexander. Now, Alexander had been a student of Aristotle, who at his better moments seemed to believe in one universal divine spirit. And so Alexander viewed the Jews as a people of philosophers, he said. And he had great respect for the monotheistic beliefs of the Jewish nation, and he gave them freedom for religion, freedom of religion, complete freedom. As long as they paid their taxes to the Greek Empire, they could follow any religion they wanted. And they did. So they entered into a kind of contract with him that they could have, they were the exception to the Hellenistic world, which was required most of the time to worship the Greek gods. They were an exception, and they followed their own traditions. Meanwhile, the upper class of the Jews began to speak Greek. The Hebrew scriptures had been recently translated into Greek. And there was a split among the Jews between the lower classes who wanted to keep their own culture and the upper class, which was rapidly Hellenizing. But it was all voluntary. Nobody was forcing them to do anything. Unfortunately, Alexander died in 323 BC, 9 years after he conquered the Middle East. And as he lay on his deathbed, his generals hovered around him, and the question was, to whom do you leave your empire? And his answer as he died was, to the strongest. What do you think happened? A war between the three generals. One was named Seleucus and one was named Ptolemy. Ptolemy created the city of Alexandria in Egypt, named after his master Alexander the Great. Seleucus created a Syrian empire. Both were Greek, and that was in Antioch. And of course, if you know the map, Judah is right between Antioch in the north and Alexandria in the south. They fought a 20-year war, Seleucus and Ptolemy, and at the end the Ptolemies won, and Judah became a province in the Ptolemaic Empire. Ptolemy's most famous descendant was Cleopatra of Egypt, but she wasn't Egyptian, she was Greek. So the Jews lived under the Ptolemies, and at that point the Bible was translated into Greek, and they were, again, the Ptolemy emperors entered into the same contract with the Jews that Alexander had had. You can have complete religious freedom, just pay your taxes and be good citizens of the Ptolemaic Empire, which they did for 100 years, from 300 to 200 BC. In 200 BC, war broke out again between the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid empires, and this time the Seleucids won. Antiochus the Great was their king, and he entered into the same agreement the Jews had had with Alexander and the Ptolemies, that they could have religious freedom. And everything was fine for 25 years, until an emperor came to the Seleucid throne named himself Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus, manifestation of God. He thought he was an incarnation of Zeus. And he decreed that all his peoples, all over the Middle East, the northern part of the Middle East, had to worship him as Zeus. Everybody said, fine. You already have 25 gods, why not just add another? But the Jews couldn't do that, being monotheists. And he cracked down on Judaism by outlawing circumcision, kosher slaughter of animals, teaching the Torah, the Bible, the kids. All the things that made Judaism a particular religion, he banned. And when he brought a statue of himself dressed as Zeus and put it up in the sacred compound of the temple in Jerusalem, that sparked the Jewish rebellion. A man named Mattathias, an old priest, led the rebellion, and they began attacking the Seleucid army that was occupying Judah. But Mattathias was a very pious Jew, and he wouldn't fight on the Sabbath. So, of course, the Syrians, the Seleucids, attacked on the Sabbath, and the Jews were being wiped out. Then Mattathias died, and his son Judas Maccabeus, or Judah the Maccabee, took over. Maccabee means hammer. It indicates the tactics he used. His guerrilla army would come down from the hills, hammer at the Seleucids, and then hide in the hills again. Judas Maccabeus said, we have to violate the Sabbath in order to save it and the rest of Judaism. So they fought on Saturday, and amazingly, after 3 years of battle, from 168 to 165 BC, they actually defeated the Seleucid army, marched into Jerusalem, and found the temple had been desecrated. They had sacrificed pigs on the altar, so they had to tear down the altar and build a new one. And the great menorah, the great 8-foot golden candlestick that stood before the Ark of the Covenant, of which that is a miniature reproduction, had gone out. Now those lights always had to burn. In any synagogue you visit, you'll find that in the front of the synagogue there's an eternal light that never goes out. Of course it represents God, like the vigil light in the Catholic Church. But that menorah, the multi-branch candlestick that represented the light of God, had been allowed to go out. And so they rekindled the light, rededicated the altar, cleansed the temple, and Judas Maccabeus declared an 8-day festival of light. They had missed the holiday of Tabernacles that year. Under the Seleucids, they couldn't observe it, and that's an 8-day festival. And that's probably why he chose 8 days. So an 8-day festival of light was declared to celebrate what really was the first victory in a war fought for religious freedom in the history of the world. And that's one reason why Hanukkah is especially observed in America, because the idea of freedom and liberty and self-determination, these are all the great sacred ideas of America, and it's what Hanukkah is all about. Now, the menorah, if you look at it, is an abstract tree, a tree of light. That's a tree of light. That's a Shaker spirit drawing. The Shaker lady who saw that had a vision of an angel holding that tree. It's a very ancient symbol of God. And that brings us to Christmas. Christmas has an obviously totally different theme than the religious freedom theme of Hanukkah, but the symbol is identical. A Christmas tree may not look like a menorah, but it's identical. It's a tree of light. It just happens to be a pine tree, so it's shaped differently. But the idea of the tree of light goes back to pagan mythology long before other Jews or Christians. So it unites the two holidays, even though the themes are different, since in the darkest time of the year, which is what we're experiencing now, that's when we need the light of God. Jesus, of course, wasn't really born in December, but probably in the spring. Shepherds wouldn't have their sheep out on the hills of Judea in December, everybody would get sick. But they made it on the shortest day of the year, or a few days later, in order to say when we need the light of God, we've got it. Now, where does Christmas, I'm not going to tell you the Christmas story, you know that, but I will say a few words about how it came to be celebrated the way it is. Most of the accoutrements of Christmas are really 19th century English accoutrements. The holly and the ivy and the Christmas tree, which was German but became English. How did that happen? The Puritans, who shaped an important part of this country, banned Christmas. It was forbidden to be celebrated. Why? Because Christmas was a riotous holiday in which mobs would careen through the streets in drunken revels, hold people up, steal from them, break into the great houses, steal from the rich. One of the Christmas hymns says, "Today our poor folk raise it up and cast it down the proud," very socialistic, I think. In any case, it was a dangerous time to be on the streets. And the Savior's birthday now is being celebrated in a riotous and very nasty way. And the elders of New York decided to do something about that. And in 1822, they had a meeting in Chelsea. Still there, the same houses are still there in Chelsea, right near General Theological Seminary, still an Episcopal seminary. And one of the teachers at General Seminary was Clement Clark Moore, a very important Episcopalian and leader of New York. And at that meeting, he was prevailed upon to join a committee to do something to rescue Christmas from the riotous mobs and turn it into a respectable 19th century Victorian, family-oriented, child-centered holiday. And so he wrote a poem. It was the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. He's in bed with his wife, my ma in her kerchief, and I in my cap had just settled ourselves down for a long winter's nap. And he hears on the roof the clatter of reindeer's hoofs, and he goes to the living room, and there a little elf, not the 400-pound Santa Claus of the Macy's parade, couldn't possibly get down anyone's chimney, but an elf Santa Claus comes down the chimney, fills the stockings, and overnight, that poem swept the country, and people began to fill stockings and have presents at the hearth. and center the holiday on children, and send people Christmas cards saying, well, this year we had a homey, child-centered Christmas the way we always have. But they hadn't. It was something brand new. But nobody had ever thought of a better holiday. It's great, Santa and the gifts and all the rest, and the holly and the ivy and the Christmas. And where did the Christmas tree come from? The same emergency of rescuing Jesus' birthday from the mob was very important in England too. We know how they saved it in New York in 1822, which swept America. But in 1840, Prince Albert married Queen Victoria. He was a German. And he immediately, that first Christmas that he was in Windsor Palace, he brought a Christmas tree to England. And they did something else. They too were worried about Christmas, because on Christmas, in the great manor houses of England, the tenant farmers, the peasants, would attack the houses. They'd sometimes burn them down if the master did not put out great tables of hams and lambs and cows and give enormous feasts to these people and presents. It was an intimidating holiday in those great houses of England, and a riotous and violent time. They had to do something to rescue them. And so the peasants didn't think so, but at least the people around England thought so. So Prince Albert brought the Christmas tree, and then they did something amazing. In Windsor Castle, they had rooms with 30-foot high ceilings. They put 2 floors in there. So you ended up with 3 levels, 10-foot high, which was very low for the time in the palace. And they filled the space with armchairs and sofas that nobody had ever seen before. People used to sit in very stiff chairs. At this point, you begin to have more relaxing kind of furniture. And they had an artist come in and do pictures of Queen Elizabeth sitting in an armchair, knitting, while Prince Albert sat by the fireplace next to his Christmas tree, reading the newspaper or a magazine. And these were sent out all over the kingdom. And this became the way to celebrate Christmas. Stay home with the children. Not drink. Father Christmas brings presents and fills the stockings. So they did in England the same thing. In 1840 it began, and in 1843 it was really sealed by the writing of Charles Dickens of A Christmas Carol. And the ghost of Christmas present is essentially Santa Claus. And he's surrounded, he appears to Scrooge surrounded by gifts and the spirit of right goodwill and all of this. And this becomes what Christmas is. Bob Cratchit had a big turkey for Christmas and a plum pudding. And again, this was almost invented overnight. And within a few years, people were saying, and we had a traditional Christmas the way we always have, but they hadn't. It's when you come up with a good idea, and this is about the best idea best holiday the mind of man has ever conceived. You've got the infinite becoming finite, the eternal becoming time-bound, the creator becoming the creation, God becoming man, God, the Father entering into our life and validating human life by becoming one of us. And it's all surrounded by trees and holly and ivy and wreaths and all the 19th century accoutrements that give you the warm and ruddy feeling that Victorian England gives us. So it's a great holiday, and it was invented almost overnight, both in New York and in London at the same time, and we've had it ever since. And we think it came down from heaven 200, 300, 3,000, thousands of years ago. It really is something rather recent, only 200 years. Pardon me?
Only Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah. So it's a 200-year holiday, but a great one.
Bill O'Reilly said it. What did he say? He was trying to defend Christmas and said Christianity is not a religion, therefore. Really, he drove it to the point of ridiculousness. The picture of Queen Victoria was reproduced in Godey's Lady's book, The Ladies Magazine. And I wish I thought to send it to myself. We could project it. It's really lovely. Queen Victoria standing there with this lovely tree. But it was a tabletop tree, not that big. It was maybe 3-4 feet high. So by today's standards, it's very modest by today's standards.
So that's how you invent a holiday, and if it's a good one, everyone thinks it came down from them.
Yeah.
Queen Victoria appeared in other things, though. She wasn't in chocolate